I'm Sarah Mulligan-Williams, and this is Creatives Processing. I'm the creative director behind Word of Mouth, my studio partnering with small businesses and nonprofits on creative strategy, brand identity, and content production. I also curate Comedy 101, a live film series where I put foundational comedy films in front of an audience and talk about what makes them work. And now, this podcast. Three pretty different things on the surface, but they're really all the same thing to me: an excuse to celebrate the craft behind something and ask how it got made. That question, how did that get made? And what did it actually take? Is what drives everything I do. So creatives processing is me pointing that question at the people I most want to learn from. Working creatives, people who make art for a living and have figured out a few things along the way. The podcast does for creatives what word of mouth does for my clients. Helps make sure the world can see the work. They've got the mission. My job is to make sure the world can see it. Every episode, I get to shine a light on someone doing genuinely meaningful creative work. Their process, their challenges, and what it really takes to do this kind of work well. Whether you're deep in a creative career, just starting out, or someone who works alongside creatives and wants to understand those wild, weird, wonderfully sensitive brains, this show is for you. This is Creatives Processing, where creatives reveal their process and process what it means to create. My guest today is Mona Shomali, climate fiction author, visual artist, and director of a youth environmental leadership program. I wanted to talk with Mona because she's someone who has spent years at the intersection of serious academic work and genuine creative practice. And she's figured out how to make those two things not just coexist, but strengthen each other. We met through a local entrepreneurship community, and I've been wanting to get her on the show ever since her launch party for her first book, Water Mamas, where she first told the story of receiving 180 rejections before deciding to self-publish. In this conversation, we get into what it actually takes to transform dense, complex subject matter into a story people can't put down, the very long road to getting a book into the world on your own terms, and what working with young people has taught her about keeping creative possibility alive. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, please follow or subscribe to Creatives Processing wherever you're listening or watching right now. It's the best way to make sure you never miss an episode, and it genuinely helps the show reach more people. You can also follow at Creatives Processing on Instagram, which is where I share new episodes first. And if you're in the Bay Area, I'm hosting a Comedy 101 screening at the New Parkway in Oakland on April 21st and at the Roxy Theater in San Francisco on April 23rd. We're watching Shaun of the Dead, and I'll be diving into what makes Edgar Wright one of the most visually inventive comedy directors working today. Ticket link is in the show notes. Alrighty, here's my conversation with Mona Shomali. Mona, I am so happy that you're here on my podcast. This is wonderful. I mean, I remember it was a few months ago we had met at Entrepreneur Club, and then I had mentioned the podcast, and you pitched yourself for me. And when anybody pitches me, I'm always kind of like, yeah, maybe. I never want to commit to anything. And then I saw you had your book launch party, and just hearing you speak about the process of writing and creating Water Mamas, like going through self-publishing and everything, was just like such an amazing story. I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah. I got you with those anecdotes.
You sure did. You sure did.
Get some
yeah.
share some of them today.
Hell yeah. So you've worn a lot of hats, professor, academic author, climate fiction writer, essayist, visual artist, program director. So that's a lot of titles. So when somebody asks you what you do, what do you tell them?
I always say my 9 to 5, I'm a director of a youth environmental leadership program. And then I say, but my true self is an artist and a writer, or I say painter, author sometimes.
Yeah.
So I kind of have split my life into the things I do for passion, and they're bigger than hobbies, right? Because I sold my last piece for $5,000, which puts me in the rank of like people who are truly selling and having shows, right? And so I think when I say I do all these things, sometimes I think people think like, she writes for fun little stories, maybe a blog, or she paints maybe some hills or something. But I feel like I'm actively doing all these things pretty seriously.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm seriously doing the art. The book cover is a painting of mine. Seriously doing the writing and seriously doing my job because I host a youth award for youth that are in the environmental space. Who show leadership. So that's like a very big thing. It's Mexico, Canada, and the US. So like all the things are pretty, I'm going hard in all the things.
Yeah. And you were a professor of international relations in New York City. You taught at three different universities. Like, what pulled you towards those subjects? And I also want to hear, like, what pulled you to New York as well?
Oh my God, this is my favorite topic. This is going to
Me
be so
too.
funny. I know, just anything New York. Okay,
I
so
almost wore my
basically,
MetroCard earring and then I forgot to. So sorry.
oh my God, I love that. I love living in New York, which is why my main character lives in New York. And I love everything about New York, even the dog poop in the slushy snow when nobody plows the snow. Like, I even am like, oh, wow, that's such a New York thing. Like, I am enthralled by the New Yorkness of things.
I mean, I grew up there and I'm still just so I have such a, being a New Yorker, I always romanticize the West Coast, especially California, but I still having not lived in New York now for nearly a decade, like there is nothing like my home. It's still my home, like I can go back, I have family there, but just it is such an unknowable city and there's so many facets to it and it is just like one of my favorite subject matters completely. I love New York.
Me too. I lived there for 10
Yeah,
years. So we've been back the same amount of years because I've been back 10 years. And I just, I'm just so excited every time I go
me
there.
too. Me too. Even though, I mean, right now they're getting hit by that blizzard, and my mom keeps sending me pictures, and she's like, "It's actually really quite peaceful." I'm like, "You don't have to lie. It's fucking miserable."
When it all started, when I went to undergrad and I started as an art major, believe it or not. And I went to UCSC and then I took an environmental studies class just to fulfill the prerequisite. And in this class, it was a combination of like slideshows of the outside world, like the outside, and then the combinations of that and being outside, like bus trips to Big Sur or bus trips to different forests, or um, even UC Santa Cruz is on 40 hectares of redwood forest. So we would go into the forest. So I was like, I love painting, but I would really like to just be outside. And I chose a degree where I would spend most of my time outside. So I chose to be an environmental studies degree. Of course, still took art classes, learned how to paint in oils on a university level. And then once I was spending all that time outside, um, I became sort of enthralled with the Amazon. It just kind of became an obsession. And then I was like, who lives there? I want to know about the people who live there because this is my favorite
What was
ecosystem.
that first kernel of, like, the Amazon?
Um, I think the density of the forest was really appealing. The amount of species, 15 to 20% of all life forms are in the Amazon. The fact that there are so many non-studied species that have pharmaceutical qualities. There was just so much where I was like, it rains all the time. And the rain is like 10 minutes off, 10 minutes on. It's
You could have just gone
not
up to
months.
Portland for that, like
But the even like the how tall it is, and there's like four layers, like the ground floor, the understory, the emergent layer, like like learning all these stories of the forest and things. Certain animals are only certain levels. Like it just was really to me my favorite ecosystem. Um, and then I was like, who lives there? And then I started to learn about the indigenous people who live there. And I was like, holy shit, like that's so cool. Like I want to live there. I want to know what it's like to live there. And so I engineered it so that I spent a lot of my time in the environmental studies degree learning about other countries. I would take classes like environmental problems at the US Mexico border. That was one of my favorite classes. And so I was doing that. And then it occurred to me that if I could get some type of international degree after undergrad, I could do international environmental work. That was my dream. So I coupled it with a global affairs degree with NYU. And then, boom, I'm a case researcher on Sariaku versus Ecuador in the Inter American Court. I'm interviewing Sariaku members. I'm living with them for a few weeks in a town called Puyo, where it was sort of like a retreat where we were sharing information. The lawyer of the tribe was sharing information. They were sharing information. I was sharing my case research with them. And in that time, they were like, "Hey, can we paint your face?" And this is before cultural appropriation. And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Oh, okay." And so they painted my face with this black root that comes out of the ground. And they painted it like how they painted their own faces. And they were like, I was like, "When does this come off?" They're like, "In a month." So I was like, "Holy shit, I have to go to a major city next week." So I went to Quito and everybody treated me like I was indigenous. And I will tell you that I was treated like shit. And I just got like a 0.000 half of 1% perspective on how bad indigenous people were treated in the big cities. People would cut in front of me in line. People would say things under their breath. People wouldn't serve me or talk to me. So I had that experience, and my empathy just developed even more and more and more. So when I went back to my graduate degree, that just became my obsession. Just indigenous human rights in the Amazon, really focused, teaching so many facets of it, and then leading a summer abroad program called Indigenous Human Rights in the Amazon, taking 10 kids to live with the Makushi in Guyana. Um, and it really became like my goal. It just became my goal to build capacity in the way that indigenous people could fight for their ancestral land, because ancestral land is tied to ancestral culture for indigenous people. It's so place based. And so, yeah, so that was my route. And then I taught university. I taught all these courses having to do with these issues. I even taught a class called The Amazon: Human Rights and Resource Conflicts, and dove into all the different countries that were being affected by oil exploration, exploitation. And the way that it got to where we are now is I basically loved teaching university, loved it. So I pivoted because I was being paid peanuts in university, like such a low salary because I was adjunct. So I basically pivoted so that I'm working with the same age group, 18 to 22, but in a program where I'm now providing coaching and mentorship and skills building. So it's the same gang.
Yeah.
It's the same gang, and they're all doing environmental projects, and many of them are indigenous and mostly youth of color. So it was a great horizontal move. And then after a few years, I wrote the nonfiction book that became the fiction book.
And we're definitely going to dive into, because like so many of these words that you're saying, like the Makushi, Seriaku, I'm like, oh, I recognize all those now because I read your book. And I really want to, we will dive into like how it was a nonfiction book and then you changed it to be fiction, kind of like integrating in your own experiences. But, with all of these, whether you're writing fiction or an essay or picking up a paintbrush, like what is the thing you're always trying to do? Like, is there a question underneath that work? Because you seem to be like such a curious person, and like such a passionate person about the things that you're curious about. So can you talk a little bit about like, what are you trying to achieve with those different mediums that you're doing?
I think I'm really interested in like cultures that intersect and clash. And I'm also really interested in modalities and ways of thought that clash and like making choices, like having to make the right choice, the wrong choice, the suboptimal choice. What is truth? What is true for you? What is true for someone else?
Yeah, because
What is the
you've described yourself as someone who tells stories that question competing morals and values. So it's like whether with words or a paintbrush. So like how did you arrive to that as your through line? Like where's that kernel of like this is why this I'm so passionate about this.
I think being Iranian American and having to constantly choose what I wanted from being Iranian and what I wanted from being American, it was a constant mosaic. And many of my Iranian American friends talk about it. It was like a constant, oh, I don't really like that from Iranian culture. Oh, I don't really like that from American culture. So we kind of, um, are a blend. For example, one of my Iranian qualities is that when my dad comes over to spend the night, I give him my bed because in Iranian culture, the guest gets your bed
Mm.
and you sleep on the couch. So I've decided to take that on. Something that I have not taken on is, sort of shaming sexual behavior is really big in Iranian culture. I mean, of course, it's worse now since the Arabs colonized Iran and made it Muslim. The Muslim culture is really shamey, and I've decided to not take any of that on. As if people who are listening go through my website, you will see tons of naked ladies. I have no problem painting nudes, so I have decided to throw off the shackles of shame when it comes to nudity and sex.
Your work like sits at this intersection of art and advocacy and education. Do those all feel like the same impulse to you, or do you hold them separately?
They all feel really similar. I mean, advocacy is huge for me. In my policy consultant days, I was doing advocacy. I was lobbying the UN on behalf of small island states that were about to go under because of sea level rise. And so I was advocating for them to get environmental refugee status in different countries that at the time weren't accepting them. So yeah, advocacy is hugely important to me. I advocate for the youth in my program to get to their highest version of themselves. I'm always advocating for something or for someone. Just advocating for people to live their best lives, advocating for myself. Even when I go to the doctor and they tell me, oh, this is what's going on, I'm like, no,
Mhm.
tell you there are other options and I want to look at the other options.
Yeah.
So I'm just very much advocating.
So you run this youth environmental leadership program. Like, what do you get working with young people that you don't get from your other work, be it like creating for yourself?
So
Yeah.
much. I mean, I'm permanently suspended in a state of what is possible because these youth are always, bringing forth ideas before they've gotten to the place where reality shuts them down. So we're living in a constant space of what if because they all come into my program with projects and ideas. That's how they win. We have like 460 applicants, we choose 6 and then they come with these programs. And so those programs, a lot of adults would look at them and be like, that's not feasible. That's not manageable. That's not logistical. That's not, and we're like, you know what? We don't
Yeah.
care. We're here just to build up this project. And if it seems out there, if it seems not possible, we're still going to work on it. And I think, we're just, before dreams die, we're working with youth and trying to push that out as far as we can and just, suspend ourselves in a state of what is possible. It's good for my creativity and it's also good for my advocacy because I advocate for these projects. Um, It's also good because I love that youth bracket. I love 16 to 22 is my favorite demographic of humans.
Mm,
So I love them. I also feel they keep me cool. It's I'm a little bit of a vampire because through them I do get to find out what's the good music, what's the good clothes,
yeah.
what's the good show, what's the good movie, what's the good podcast, what's the good Instagram account to follow. So I'm lucky in that I'm being kept relevant,
Yeah.
of trends and cultural trends. There's so many cultural trends where I've been corrected. Just the other day, I was corrected by a young person who told me Aborigine is no longer okay to say.
Oh,
Um, and I was like, "Oh, really?" And they were like, "Yeah." And then I did like a quick online search and saw that people were saying this is no longer okay to say the word Aborigine. And see, I would have never known unless an 18-year-old corrected me.
yeah.
And that's what I get out of it is I'm an early adopter because I'm corrected constantly and I welcome those corrections. I don't have ego about it. I'm like, please keep me relevant.
Yeah, there's something to be said about like intergenerational connection and relationships and just the openness and the willingness to be corrected and to learn from others. Like just because you had said that word and then you were corrected doesn't mean that you're bad or everything else you've ever thought is wrong, but it's like this is a safe space where people can feel empowered to correct and to educate in that way.
Yeah, because I do think cancel culture, if done in a certain way, um, can be done with such rage because you made the wrong choice to say a certain word or express an idea that the other person doesn't really feel they have been brought to the other side.
Yeah.
They just feel deflated, doxxed, just they feel maybe they even want to double down. So you can't really bring them on to the other side if you shame them.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm really lucky, like I am really lucky that the youth I work with don't do that to me. They're gentle, and maybe because of the dynamic we've set up, maybe because I've said I want to learn from you. There's a dynamic where they're always correcting me but not canceling me.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Um, so before we get into the whole journey of creating your first book, I want to start with the painting on the cover, which this is a video podcast, listeners, if you're not watching. I also have it in my hands. Water mamas. So you envisioned your own painting on the cover before you had even finished writing the book. And like that's such a striking detail, like holding a visual idea and a narrative idea at the same time. Can you, I mean, for those not looking, can you describe the painting, what it is, what it means, and why it was always going to be the cover for you?
Okay, so I have a genius friend named April who is the one who made it happen because it was actually quite complex. The painting itself was a two-panel painting, two paintings next to each other, and it was called Death in the Forest. And I had painted one painting with a mother, daughter, and a father that were possibly Yanomami. That was the clothing and look I had painted based on research. And then I painted the second painting with just tree trunks with red resin coming out of them, but also would look like blood. So like the trees were the trees had all been cut down. The first one, the trees were standing. The second one, the trees were all cut down, and it was just a man, and he was crying. And so it was called Death in the Forest. And when I did that, I was harking back to my time in Ecuador where mercenaries would come through hired by oil companies and rape, kidnap, kill the Sarayaku, the Kichwa of Sarayaku, for not wanting their forests to be exploited. and the way they were exploiting it is they were setting up little explosions, because one way to test if there's oil underground is to hit an explosion and then or ignite an explosion and then measure the seismic waves that hit if there's oil and come back up. So, without their permission, they were just putting explosives. People fought back. Then these mercenaries, did all this stuff. So in my painting, Death in the Forest, I imagine that's after the mercenaries have come through and that this man has lost his wife and daughter, and the trees are all cut down. And the trees are crying. He's crying. He's crying about the trees and also his daughter and wife. So, having said that's the painting, we knew we couldn't put that whole painting on the cover. So, what we did is we chose the first panel where the trees were standing, and then we just, through the magic of graphic design, erased the Yanomami people in the painting. And we had to erase them because it just was too crowded and we needed a place to put the title. So April skillfully, she's an artist herself, skillfully erased the people without it looking jarring or even, it looks so
Hmm.
intentional. It doesn't look like anything's missing.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that there were
No
people in
one
the original
realizes.
art. Yeah.
If you go look at my website, the original art, you'll see the Yanomami there. But yeah, and by the way, the Yanomami do not live in Ecuador. They live in Brazil, but I chose the Yanomami because I happen to have a really great postcard I had bought in Brazil of a Yanomami father, daughter, and mother. And so I wanted to transpose that into the oil painting. So have to say, for those of you who are clocking, wait a minute, the Yanomami are not in Ecuador.
Yes. Going now into the book, like you had all of this academic knowledge where you lived for a bit and studied and immersed yourselves in these cultures, like years of research and courses and expertise. Like when you decided to tell this story, where did it even begin?
Um, I've One of the dynamics that I kept coming across over and over and over was that environmentalists were up against Indigenous people. They were speaking for Indigenous people. Indigenous people pushed back and said, "We never asked you to speak for us." They often would do things like, "Oh, they use a cell phone. They're just not acting Indigenous anymore." Like as if Indigenous culture couldn't be this fluid culture like every
It's
other
a
culture
mono
gets.
like it's a monolith. We're one note. Yeah.
The environmentalists were sort of promoting the noble savage and in a way acting very colonial.
Yeah.
And so when I would see that huge clash, remember clashes, I love clashes. So when I would see that clash between environmentalists and Indigenous people, that's when I thought, I'm going to write a book about this clash. And so then my thinking was, okay, I need something they're going to clash about. And I want it to take place in the Amazon. So, what clash can I have in the Amazon? And then I just started doing some research and I was like, oh, this geoengineered artificial rain called cloud seeding is really taking off. They're using it in India, China. Right now, they're using it in the high California, Sierra Nevada. And I was like, oh, wow. And then I researched it a little bit more and saw they use silver iodide in the process. And then I saw that Australian environmentalists were so against the silver iodide because they felt it was poisoning the water that they lobbied for Australia to stop doing artificial rain, and Australia stopped. So already I had my book. I was like, hold up. There's already a conflict. There's going to be someone, some state, UN, some government wants to do the artificial rain in the Amazon where it's no longer falling. And they're going to use this chemical, silver iodide. And then the Indigenous people are going to say that that chemical hurts their spirits. And of course, I did a really deep dive into their spirits so I could speak the language of their fear of their spirits. And so I realized that was the book, just the having the clash be artificial rain versus Makushi spirits that live in the forest, not wanting to hurt them, being their angle. wanting to solve climate change, being the angle of the environmental scientists at the UN. And I had my book.
And this was nonfiction when you started off, correct?
So this book that I just told you was the fiction version.
Okay.
The nonfiction version was a really fucking boring series
Tell me.
of
Tell me about how fucking boring it was.
was chapters and chapters of agreements that protected Indigenous people. The Organization of American States, the Declaration of Man, the UN Covenant on Civil Rights, just like, I was basically making the case. And I wasn't just making the case about Indigenous people. I had intended it to be a primer for people who wanted to get into ecology, social justice. So I had everything in there from pesticides and farm workers and GMOs and fracking and the myth of wilderness. Wilderness is not wild. The myth of science being neutral. I had tons of examples of how science is culturally constructed. I had so many essays, and they were all factual, and they all read like just, little, I don't know, textbook
Yeah.
chapters. And so I was not successful in pitching it. And, the current book, it's not like I was successful in pitching that to publishers. I wasn't. But I was successful in pitching it to friends. Friends would hear about it and say, I'm getting involved. Like, so many people were like, I'm involved in this. I want to get involved. But with the nonfiction book, I was getting feedback from my friends. Girl, we cannot fucking read this. This is like too much, too
Was
like.
it, were you like so involved in like the academic world at that point that it's like, well, obviously this is what I would write to because this is the type of paper, the type of essay that I was already writing, but then not thinking about like, how does this reach audiences outside of academia?
That's a really, like, if you want to put it in one nutshell, the first book was academic.
Yeah, totally. So then what, after, putting so much of your heart and soul into creating that nonfiction book and being like, well, I have all this material, like what changed it? Was it in the conversations with friends and collaborators? Like, I have the nugget
No,
here. Like, why not make it into fiction? Talk about that
no,
process.
100% my own decision. I hadn't discussed it with anyone. I just thought to myself, what if I could make a really fun, interesting book that has like an arc of story and narrative and exciting pieces? And what if I can just shovel this nonfiction stuff in the book so as they're reading it, they're learning? Because that's the number one thing people say to me after I read my book. They say I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I just shoved all this information, but still had like a story arc, a love story, um, a friendship story. There were like little stories within stories. And I enjoyed writing those because I am also creative. I'm not just an academic.
Yeah.
So I was really able to use my creative mind, merge my creative mind with my academic mind.
Yeah. Why did you want to write a book in the first place?
I really felt that when I was teaching, my students kept coming up to me and saying, I never saw it that way. I never saw it that way. Like when I taught Western science is not neutral, I taught about Carl Linnaeus, this Dutch botanist who is responsible for our current taxonomy and of how we classify plants. And at the time that he developed his taxonomy, he said that flowers had penises and vaginas and were having explicit sex and getting married. So because of that, he said that botany was too sexual for women to study. So in his lifetime, women were kept out of botany. So of course, years later, we've thrown away all of those pieces, but ironically, we still use his taxonomy. So it's like there is culture in science. We get rid of some, we keep some, but for a long time, his thoughts on women not being able to study botany were a part of botany.
Yeah.
So I would share things like that in class, and I had so many examples of how even survival of the fittest, we had been taught it incorrectly. It had been bastardized because in true reality, the fittest is often the one that adapts and cooperates the most. And it is not always the survival of the fittest is this capitalistic competition at all costs, zero sum game theory. It's not that. Even tragedy of the commons, I question that if Eleanor Ostrom won a Nobel Prize in economics for disproving the tragedy of the commons, that if you have cultural institutions that regulate how resources are used, cultural institutions, then resources are not overused, because the tragedy of the commons is this idea that if you don't if the tragedy of the commons, if the common isn't owned privately, it will be abused.
Mm.
That's the assumption of the tragedy of the commons. And it gives way to saying, okay, we all need to own it. We need to own it privately. But she was coming along and saying, no, we can communally own the commons and we won't abuse it. So I taught that. So I was constantly teaching these courses that were sort of at the juxtaposition of environmental science and international relations. That had become my sweet spot. And I think I just felt like I had things to share. I had students that were really into my classes and stayed in touch with me, and I thought to myself, I have something here I want to share, and I think people are going to respond to it.
Yeah. Now,
So
like with the rewriting it from nonfiction to fiction, like what were the prerequisites you needed before you could actually start? Like, did you feel you had to do more research, or was it more about figuring out how to tell what you already knew?
I had to get an editor. I mean, that's really what it boiled down to, is I had to get an editor, and I had to get a good one that I liked, that I would be able to work with for a few years,
Yeah.
because we did like 8 rounds together. And I had to get one with a strong point of view. You've heard me say that she really wanted me to start the book with a dream sequence, and I put my foot down and was like, no dream sequence. This is not the type of a book with a dream sequence. And she was like, well, Mona, I actually think it is. And she lobbied and lobbied, and finally I said yes, and now people love the dream sequence.
Yeah,
So
and I remember you saying too, talking about like just so insightful, thinking about like even type formatting too, how you originally like at some point maybe it was your editor that said like keep it in italics so that people instantly know it's a dream sequence, and you were like,
I said
nope.
no. There was no way in hell I was going to do it in
Yeah.
italics. And that was my book designer, April, that said do it in italics. My editor's name is Dana, and she's amazing. And so Dana and April were sort of my thought partners, because one was how the book should present, and one was how the book should read.
Yeah. What is it like? Like, how do you choose a good creative partner? Because so much of this too was, you said from the get-go, like having an editor was so huge and having like a partner in creativity. So what do you look for in a good creative collaboration?
I mean, I am so lucky because April chose me. I was telling her, I give up, I'm done. I had taken my book to a few publishers and a few literary agents, and they had all said no. Not a few, 180, okay? So I took them to this many people, and then I told April, I'm done. I'm not doing it. And April said, Mona, I will do this with you. I will help you. I will do all the things you can't do. I will do it. And I was like, are you serious? Like, you're going to help me self publish it? Like, that's a lot. She's like, I will do it. I will figure it out. And of course, I paid her. I mean, this isn't like, non compensated situation. But just saying that, I was like, well, if she believes in me this hard and is truly going to do the things I don't know how to do, let's do it. And then the editor, same thing. Someone suggested the editor to me. through a friend, through a connection. And she came into my life and she was just so fun and kind and nice that I actually had a really good time with her. And I thought to myself, I'm having so much fun with this lady that I have a feeling this is going to be great.
Amazing. So it's the people that you work with also need to be passionate about what you're doing and believe in you.
She always, the editor always told me this was a great book. She always said that. And April always said it was a great book. So I think, having them believe in me, and I have other people on my team. I have former students that signed on to do publicity and promotion. And other people I met, someone I met at the book launch came up to me and said, I'd love to help you promote. So, I do think it's just such a process of building a team you believe in. And I think once you have a great team, you love your team. They love you. It's like it feels like you're in a cocoon building something together, and then you're going to make it out and show the world. But in that cocoon phase, it felt really good.
What did the process of writing and collaborating look like? Because writing can be, I mean, writing is a solitary act. It's you and it's your computer, maybe it's a paper and pen, but then, kind of just immersing yourself in your work. How do you talk, like, if you're able to, like, talk a little bit about, like, what is it like having to pivot from the solitary nature of writing to the collaborative nature of, like, having a team um, sharing their own thoughts and perspective and how it shapes the work?
Writing on my own was very much a fast process. I would say I wrote the book maybe in a month. It was like very fast. And
Now, were
then once
you,
like
if I could interject, like, what does writing look like for you? Or do you have, like, a routine of, like, I have my coffee and a candle and I'm in, like, a corner of my home? Or is it more like I need to be in a co-working space or a coffee shop where, like, I'm surrounded by other people working, like,
everywhere,
ev
everywhere. I'm just a big slut. I can be anywhere. I can be at any location and do the writing because for me, the writing is I've already know where it's going, so I have to get it there. I had the story in my head, and then it transitioned. So it went from me writing it for a whole month, and it was a very quick transition from me to the editor because I wrote it so fast, and I knew I needed an editor to do drafts. I mean, nobody edits their own shit. It's just, I'm just sure some people do, but not me. Um, so I brought her on board and I would give her the draft and she would have it for like a month. And then she would give me pages and pages of notes. First of all, notes of do this, do that, do this, line by line corrections, and book assignments for me to read. She had me read, I wonder if I can see it from here. Writing with Soft Hands, I think, is one of the books she had me read. She had me read books. She was like assigning me books. And so I was reading books, I was reading her notes, I was doing the line by line. And then it wasn't even just like do this, do that. It was like rewrite this section, add more. This doesn't sound like a real conversation between friends. There's too much, um, you know, there's too much description here. This is boring. You're talking about international agreements at the UN. This is boring. There was a lot of it was like diagnostic, but not prescriptive. Like it wasn't like how I could make it better. It was like what was wrong with it.
Mm.
And so my process was always read all her notes, read her line by lines, read the book, and then get totally overwhelmed
Yeah,
and just like poop out and feel stuck and that I couldn't do any of it. And then I would tell her, I'd be like, this is too hard. I think I have to stop. Like, I think I said, this is too hard. I have to stop after every time she gave me back a draft.
sure.
And she would just be like, no, you can do this. Do not stop. And then, I would wait a little while until I recovered and I would start small and then I would just hit the ground running. And so that's why it was easy to write anywhere The first month that I wrote the book, it was in a December. I don't know which year, but I just sat on my couch and wrote it just all the time. And then when it was done, the actual edits took forever.
Mm.
Like each round took forever. We were working together for like 5 years.
Yeah.
So the edits took a really long time. And then I would come back and she'd be like, oh, there's still a lot more. And so it was
I
exhausting,
bet.
to be honest. It was exhausting. And she stuck with me the whole time. And um, she believed in it, and I really couldn't have done it without her and April as my thought
Yeah.
leaders.
Now, so you had mentioned you had spent some time in the Amazon through your work. Um, where did the story itself come from? Like, was this based off of your direct experiences in the Amazon?
Yes, I would say 70% of the book is probably facts. Like any times in the book a fact is relayed to one of the characters, it's a real fact. Um, and I would say that I had worked with the Makushi, so I knew I wanted to make them central. I had worked with the Quechua of Sarayaku very in depth, so I didn't want to write a book about them. I wanted to write a book that referenced their case because their case is a long time ago, 20 years ago. Um, and the Yanomami and the other tribe in Brazil, which I always forget. Sorry, that tribe, if you're listening. I always forget the Brazilian tribes, but I had not worked with them, but I had read quite a bit about them, and I had been in the Brazilian Amazon, working with um, another group that I don't remember their name because I only met them a few times. They were people who crossed over from Guyana to Brazil like daily. Like they lived on the border, and so they were residents of both countries. And in the thick of the Amazon, there's no boundaries. It's just like, oh, past that tree is Brazil. So they were just like migratory. And so like I was just around all of this, and I just felt I knew how to write where they lived. I knew how to describe the structures. I knew how to describe, one scene, the protagonist gets a tunga, insect to lay eggs in her toe. That happened to me. Um, when I
I'm so
was sick,
sorry.
the shaman put snake oil on my stomach to paralyze my stomach contractions. That happened to me. A lot of things happened to me that are in the books. So much of it is real. The drinking chicha and asking, what are those black bits in the chicha? And someone saying teeth. That happened to me. That was a real conversation. So much of it is real. And I think the idea just came to me of like, I want to explore this world. I want to show this world that it's not a noble savage world. It's a complex, interconnected, way of living that is not what we think it is. I haven't seen many movies represent Indigenous people as they are modern.
Mm,
Um, so I feel like um, I would love it if this book became a movie.
yeah.
I would love that. I just don't know how to make that happen, but I would love that because I feel like this would be great as a movie since it takes place in New York and um, Brazil, Ecuador, Guyana, and references to the Bay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think because it is a work of, and this is like where the lines kinda get blurred of like, okay, it's a work of fiction, but so much of it is rooted in fact, like
Yes.
having conversations, instead of just spewing out facts in a very dry manner, you're able to, discuss some of these things through conversation versus just, like, preaching to whoever is reading it. So
And also comedy, like the friendship has a lot of comedy in it. They talk about dating. I put in some of my funniest dating conversations that I had into those conversations.
yeah.
I was harvesting some of the really fun conversations I'd had and putting those into friendships and, different little vignettes. Sorry to cut you off if I
No,
cut
no,
you
no.
off
It
there.
it rounds out the experience because it isn't just dry. You're also getting like this is a you with your main character, Afa, you've really like rounded her out and given her, it's not just like a one-dimensional character on a page. Like you're understanding like this feels like a real person. I think so much of that is because it's rooted in like your real life experiences. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Um,
My editor kept saying, "Make her more like you," and it was nerve wracking because it makes you a little self conscious to put yourself on the
Of
page.
course, but they also say, like, write about what you know, and, like, you
Yeah,
know yourself quite well, you know?
yeah.
Yeah, but, like, you're writing fiction that carries serious nonfiction stakes, so how do you decide what to render as story versus what needs to be stated plainly? Because there is that divide in the book of, you will get, like, large paragraphs that are like kind of exposition, giving detail, so like the reader is caught up to speed. So how do you decide like what is story, what is fabricated, and what is fact?
That's a really big central theme of what we talked about with the editor is that you really need to be careful because it is a balance, right? So we couldn't have it be too many facts, expository facts. There had to be a lot of dialogue. Sometimes when you give the history of something, there's no dialogue, there's no one talking, it can be dry. So that was just, I would say my editor and I constantly discussed different passages and said she made a lot of passages simpler. Some of them were written at a way more technical level. She made them simpler, softer. She cut a ton of description of different things. So yeah, I would say that the editor does that
Yeah.
because if it's up to me, sometimes I can't see that dynamic. I can't see that we're boring someone because to me it's all exciting,
Yeah.
but she's the voice of, this isn't exciting to most people, Mona. So it was good for me because I think sometimes that's the whole point of an editor is like you may be like really excited by something and they come in as the reality check like, no girl, I don't think this is doing it for me.
Yeah.
And you listen because you think to yourself, she has read a lot of books, so she's coming at it because she's the editor, she's editing all these books, so she is an expert in a way that I am not. I'm an expert in my book, but she's an expert in readers and what they want to read. So those were the conversations we had. I would say all of those conversations were with her.
Yeah, and was this somebody that you knew beforehand or no?
No,
Okay.
no. I wrote the book in a month, and then my girlfriend told me, "Hey, I have a friend who just started his own environmental press," and I was like, "Oh, this might be someone to approach." So I approached him, and he was like, "This book is not for us, but we continue to encourage you to keep working on it, and we want to give you the name of an editor that works with our authors." So this is someone they used, and they were being kind enough to say like, how, reach out to her, say you knew us, and work with her. I got her a little indirectly because she came to me as a friend of the first person they suggested. So they suggested someone, and that woman said, "Oh no, Dana's amazing."
Mm.
And then I got Dana, and so yeah, I started working with her very early on because I had really written the book in a month.
Yeah, and it must have been I'm you don't need to divulge, like, the details of that conversation, but I can imagine that, it is such a vulnerable thing to share your work in a first draft form and to evaluate, is this somebody that I can trust to handle my project deftly? In working with them, what was that, yeah, what was that original conversation like? Because you hadn't worked with an editor in this capacity before, so, like, how did you, um, allow yourself to be vulnerable with this person, with something so precious to you?
Because of my time in academia, I tend to really trust um, other experts that are in the field of producing content, because I feel like so much of academia is producing content and then it gets edited. Philosophically, I don't see editing as having to do anything with my identity. I feel like it is very much about like a bowl I'm sculpting in a clay studio, and they come behind and they say, like, oh, there's a crack here. Oh, the neck could be taller. Oh, this is a little thick. Oh, the clay is wobbly. It's still my bowl.
Yeah.
And so I feel like even when I wrote an article for the Revelator and I wrote an article for the Earth Island Journal, both of them edited so heavily, so heavily. I didn't mind
Yeah.
because the idea was mine. The idea was mine. So I think for me, maybe one thing that's different for me than other people is I don't feel that vulnerability. I feel like I see her as an expert who's going to come in and refine my idea. And of course she was bold enough to say things like write a dream sequence because she thought that would bolster my idea, or she had me rewrite the end. She didn't have me rewrite the end. I wrote an end and she was like, this isn't the end, you need way more book after this. And I was like, way more book? I was like, I'm dying. And she was like, no, there needs to be like a whole other act. So I wrote like a whole other act, like a 30 pages more. um, and then she was very happy with it.
Going back to the idea of, like, having an editor help shape your work versus creating a painting and knowing when it's done. Do you think about that relationship between the 2? Because both of those are, like, solitary work, either writing or painting, but you're not giving your art to an editor to say, like, "Is this done? What else could I do to change this?" Like, are you
I
understanding
actually
this?
do.
You
I
do?
actually do. I have a process where I involve my friends. I involve my friends and I say, do the proportions look right? And many times I've been told, no, the proportion doesn't look right. Because when you're painting, sometimes you get so into the creativity and the color um, and the composition that things look off. The anatomy looks off, and so someone will sometimes say, like, this butt cheek is lower and to the right of where it should be. And something like that, I do need to hear, akin to Dana's edits. And I ask all my friends, I send them photos of paintings, and they say, oh, well, that color is kind of too dark. And that arm is out of nowhere. So because I paint
Yeah.
nudes, yeah, there's a lot that can be anatomically go wrong.
Yeah. I would say, like, part of it too could be, like, open for interpretation, like, this is how your hand has drawn the figures, so, I mean, friendships must be so important to you since you trust your friends so much to, like, look at your work in that
Friendship
way.
is important to me. Friendship is important to me. I mean, April and I are best friends, and Dana is a close friend now. Um, and, just in this little time we've been working, you've become a friend. So I feel like I do enjoy making friends that I can share passions with. And that's pretty much how a lot of the friendships look. And so, yeah, I do have a crew that I send images of paintings and ask for feedback. And maybe I'll start doing that to you.
I mean, add me to the group chat, please. So you spent years with this material. I mean, first as nonfiction, then as fiction. How did your relationship with the ideas change as you moved between those modes? And also thinking of, like, how the visuals came in there, like you had the painting and then you had the nonfiction and the draft of the fiction. Like, how did your relationship with the material and the idea change over time?
And I had a full show for my
Yeah.
paintings 4 years ago. I was already writing this book, and I had a show, and I was displaying my collection of interracial sex. Basically, it was called interracial intimacy, but we all know what it means. And so it was, people of different skin shades, all in intimate positions. And I was pushing for it because I felt it was still charged, in many ways in our culture. So I just wanted to put it out there and be like, let's discuss the charge. I think the way it changed over time is once I realized I was going to self publish, that no one out there was going to, you know, claim my book, and that I was going to have to claim it and write it myself. I think that's when everything really changed. Because I think when I was doing it for others, I remember thinking, "Oh, what cover are they going to use? Am I going to like it? Are they going to be involved in my preface? Are they going to let me dedicate the book to my ex-husband? Are they going to There was a lot of like feeling, oh, I hope I can do this. I hope I can do this. And then when it transitioned to Mona, you are self-publishing, then I was like, shit, guys, we're going to do everything we want to do. So we did all the things.
I
We
mean,
did all,
it reminds me of the work that you're doing in the youth program where these young folks will come to you with ideas and it's before the reality of life sets in where it's like not feasible, adopting that own attitude for yourself like yeah, like the sky's the limit. Let's just do everything we wanted to, and then if we can't, we'll face it down the road, but just having the freedom to make your own choices there. Can you talk about the self-publishing? Like cuz how many I thought it was like 180 places. I thought you like 180 rejections, was it?
180 rejections. Yeah. And that was an amazing aha moment I just had listening to you, because yes, the same space that I provide for them, unlimited suspension and possibility, was what we were in when we realized we were going to self-publish.
Yes. Yeah. So 180
No,
rejections.
no's, 180 no's.
And like were they just like one after another, just like blah 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 blah, blah, or was it like over like a course of a time? Just like I can't imagine how that must have felt.
It was over the course of a year. So it was just like, no, 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 no. It was just like constant no's. And I finally got one yes, but it was such like a botched yes. Like everything was misspelled. The title of the book was misspelled. They had sent me the wrong form. They said, we'd like to include your poem in our magazine. And then I went online to our trusty friend Reddit, and Reddit users had given I'm not going to name the publisher, but they had given such bad reviews to this publisher. And most of the people had written, I wish I had published myself. And so when I saw that, I was like, I guess I have to do it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I'm just so curious, like how do you let that rejection sink in? Like how does
Oh,
that
I felt like shit. I felt like shit. It really hit my self-esteem. It really hit my sense of self. Um, you've heard me talk about this before, but I could not call myself an author at all. I would call myself a writer because I felt I had not been traditionally published. I had no one interested in traditionally publishing me, and so I just couldn't call myself an author. I felt I hadn't been invited into that club. And then I met with a business coach who said to me, within 1 hour you'll be calling yourself an author. And I was like, this lady. And she was right. After an hour I called myself an author. So I
oh,
think I just needed some coaching. I needed some coaching to reframe a lot of these ideas of like, when an official club turns you down, like, can you still be the thing you would have been if you were in the club?
yeah. Yeah. So that last rejection was what finally tipped the decision towards self-publishing. Um, like so, and like bringing April in was what made self-publishing possible, right?
Well, it was her idea to
It was her
self-publish.
idea.
No, this is all April's ideas, but she basically said, let's publish on KDP, Amazon, and on Ingram Spark. And she's such a genius for doing this because Amazon gave us a great deal, really fast, really easy to work with, print on demand, boom, 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 boom. The review portal is great. Tons of people who read the book went in and reviewed it. So Amazon is good for that. But KDP, Amazon, but Ingram Spark, publishing with them meant that we had access to the Ingram Spark catalog, which is where all booksellers buy their books,
Yeah.
all of them. So after we did that, that was April's idea. She's like, we have to use Ingram Spark. And I was like, I don't know if it'll make much of a difference. She's like, it'll make a difference. And as soon as it went live on Ingram Spark, I saw that Barnes and Noble picked it up. I saw that Strand in New York picked it up and were advertising it. I saw a whole bunch of small independent booksellers all over picking it up. And then I heard from friends they would go to independent bookstores and ask for the book, and then that independent bookseller would buy it from the Ingram Spark catalog. So you can request it at any small bookstore now because it's in the Ingram Spark catalog. I'm just so lucky about the friends I had around me at the time. I mean, Dana became a friend,
Yeah.
but still people that I enjoyed working with. It was enjoyable putting the book together.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny. I think about Bad Bunny sometimes because he's on tour right now, and I see him with all his handlers and his security guards and his manager and his this, that. And I always wonder, is he friends with them? Because it seems like it would really suck to be on a year-long tour all over the world and not like your intimate crew of managers, stylists, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I know for me, I would need to love my crew.
Yeah, and I think of since I've gone independent and started working for myself, being able to source and choose the people that you wanna work with, be it, they're on the client side, so this is a client who I wanna work with, or these are collaborators that I'm hiring to do some of the work, it's these are all people that is this somebody that I would like to work with for a full year? We're locked into a contract, so, is this somebody that I wanna work with? And, that is surrounding yourself with people that this isn't to create an echo chamber, but it's surrounding yourself with people that you enjoy their company. They're great at what they do. Is there anything better than that? I can't think of anything better than that, you know?
I mean, I think if you have friends that are yes men, then yes, that would be problematic. But nobody involved with me was a yes man.
Yeah.
I think there wasn't a true power dynamic. So I think, yeah, if there was like a super hardcore power dynamic, um, you know, and if I was asking, what's your opinion? Maybe there would be a different response than someone who's known you since you were 15 and, just can be like, girl, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Now that you're self-published, can you talk about the response that you've received from being self-published? Do you have barriers to getting into some traditional published venues?
Oh yeah, I got turned down from the Bay Area Book Festival, and I even wrote because they even said self-published books are allowed if they can be sold other places besides Amazon. And I was like, ding, ding, ding! I've got Ingram Spark, so I did a whole thing, and I was turned down. And I just feel like it must have weighed on them that I was self-published because I don't know if there are that many similar books to what I'm doing. I'm discussing geoengineering and indigenous human rights and climate. I don't really see these things bundled together in a book. So I feel like I do have something that's unique. And I actually got a lot of book agents write me and say, I don't know how to sell this book. I don't know where this book would go. I don't know how to pitch this book. I don't know who would read this book. So I do think there was a little bit of that as to why I didn't get picked up. But I think that's a good thing. You know what I mean? If something can fit in a lot of genres but no genres, to me that's a good book. But I think with capitalism, if you don't have I'm not an influencer. I don't have 2 million people attached to me that will buy my book. So
That just sounds like so lazy to me, where it's like, it sounds like, oh, that's a fun challenge versus like, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm not even going to bother trying, sort of thing.
yeah,
Huh.
yeah.
Let's talk about, like working across mediums. Like you obviously have different processes for your visual work versus your prose, but is there something you can do in paint that you can't do in prose?
Yes, a lot. I can pretty much tell from what colors I use and what shapes I use how a person feels when they look at a painting.
Mm.
I can pretty much tell. I can clock it. I cannot clock with a book how somebody will feel when reading a passage. I can't. When I write it, it's like I have it all sounds to me um, like what needs to go in the book to further the arc of the story, but I can't tell. Like I had my uncle tell me he gave his book to a friend who so much could not put the book down that she was reading it while eating lunch. Like she just, and I've had many friends tell me they read it in one sitting, and um, people who don't really read that much read it. And so I would have not guessed that people found it um, exciting. That wouldn't have been my guess. I wouldn't have guessed that people found it like page turner sort of stuff. Um, I had no idea how people were going to respond to the book. But with my paintings, I have a general sense. If you see um, some of the colors I've used, because colors set moods, and colors exude from us guttural feelings. You know what I mean? Um, if I do, someone passed in my life and I did a painting for them and I used all really dark colors, dark blues, a whole bunch of dark blues, and the figure was looking down and everything was pointing down. So it's like the body language was sitting hunched over. So like I had done all the things that would make you look at that and be like, she's sad, I'm sad. Because usually when you look at a painting, you feel what the painting makes you feel, and I do feel like I have a little bit more control over that. I over the years, as people have told me what they feel about their paintings, it's usually what I anticipate. I can't say that I always feel what's in the painting. Sometimes I'll paint something that's not how I feel. So it's not always like, oh, I felt that, so I painted it. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah, I would say anticipation of the patron, the patron of, I knew people would be shocked when I did Iranian American women in the nude. I knew that would be a shock because that's one of my collections. So I was anticipating the shock, and there was a lot of shock. So I can anticipate. I could not anticipate with this book.
And then the inverse of that question, what can you do in your words that you can't do in a visual medium?
Probably be funny because it's really hard to have someone look at a painting and go, it's like not really a thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like when I write, when I lectured, I told tons of jokes and quips and little judgments and comments and remarks, and I feel like I've always been that way. And I feel like when I write, I try to write things that make me laugh. It's kind of like you've stored like little nuts, like squirrels store nuts. I've stored little nuts of conversations that have made me laugh,
Yeah.
and I've put them in the book, and I've gotten feedback that people have laughed at those parts. So I feel like, yeah, you can't really be funny as a fine painter.
Yeah. I think of like there's there was one line, and I am regretting not flagging it in the book that I have next to me, but it is stuck in my mind that knowing you have a painting background, there's this one way that you described the earth coming from, like, it's Afa and she's heading towards one of the indigenous camps, and she's driving through like essentially scorched earth where it's been dehydrated, the rain is gone, and you described the earth as like ripened like a cracked peach or something. However it was used, like it made it so obvious to me, like, this is somebody who is observant, who can look at something and know how to beautifully describe something that it made it feel so visceral. It wasn't just like, the ground was arid and dry. It's like just using words and thinking of, plumpness and peaches, like, is there anything there that you can talk to about, like, bringing in how you visualize things and then how you describe things verbally?
Um, that line, it's crazy that you brought up that line. I wrote that line when I was in college. I wrote it because I had done a water sanitation project in Brazil in the Sertão, which is this area where there's no water naturally. The ground is cracked and baked, and I remember I wrote the sun rose in the sky like a ripe peach,
Yeah,
and I wrote that line then because it was like so how it felt. And I don't know why that line stayed with me for 25
yeah,
years. And so that's the thing is sometimes these lines are things I've used other places. But I truly felt that's what it looked like. It really felt like the sun was almost like fuzzy and
yeah,
juicy and
yeah,
maybe compared to the cracked earth, it just the maybe I was imagining a peach.
yeah,
I don't know, but it really a lot of them have come out of things that I've actually thought.
yeah,
And I think maybe the way I think is a bit visual. Like for example, my apartment is pretty much in a palette. It has like a palette of colors and everything's in that palette. And I think most people who come over would never notice that. They wouldn't clock it. But for me, if I'm in an environment, I like it when there's a palette and everything is in that palette,
mm,
you know. Um, and the palette doesn't have to be two or three; it can be five colors,
mhm,
but everything's in that palette. To me, it's a language, it's a visual language, and so I clock that in environments where I go. I'm like, this place doesn't have a palette. This place has a palette. Um, you know, I just clock a lot of visual dynamics. And then I guess when I write, I'm leaning on those things because I remember in the book I described Afa's apartment, and when I was describing her apartment, I was really, really trying to describe it so you felt you were there,
yeah,
you know. And I was really going in hard, thinking about what colors she would have, what she would have on the walls. Um, and I remember I said that there were Matisse prints on the walls in her apartment. Matisse is one of my favorite artists, if not my favorite. So yeah, so the artist in me definitely tried to, you know, put some little, uh, just little surprises in the book.
yeah. I mean, I love when authors do that, and I'm calling you an author because that's what you are. I love when authors do that where you're getting a passage where they're describing, like really going into detail of what the room looks like, or, describing the sun as like a ripe peach, because it shows me this is how their brain interprets information. This is how they regurgitate it out, but it just shows like this is an observant person who is finding beauty in the world, even if it's in nature, if it's just within a palette in a room. So I really appreciate when authors do that because it gives me, it's like you have a point of view and there's clearly you are passionate about, setting a place and setting really giving the reader, allowing them to visualize and not just read.
Yeah, I think that's my whole goal is
Yeah.
I want you to visualize as much as you can while reading my book because obviously I want you to feel that you're in the Amazon.
I
that
felt
feeling.
like I was in the Amazon, especially like talking about like how the earth felt, underneath the feet and the quietness of the forest, of the rainforest. Just like everything about it, I just thought was like really beautifully done.
Thank you. That makes me feel really good because I know you are a purveyor of the arts, and I feel like it feels even better when a compliment comes from someone who is broadly exposed to the arts. It means like, yes, maybe I am in the club.
So being able to do all of these different things, I would love if you could just like walk me through how you manage all of, your job versus the creative pursuits that you do. Like how do you line up your day so that you're able to tackle all of these things? Or maybe it's not all in one day. Like talk to me about like what is your creation routine
It's
look
not
like?
all in one day.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to preface by saying I get anxious when I have free time, and that might be capitalism, meaning that I have to be a productive robot at
Mhm.
all times. That might be some of the clutches of capitalism,
Yeah.
but I definitely fill my time, and I think when I say fill my time, that doesn't mean with work. Like I fill my time with swimming and walking around Lake Merritt and yoga classes and I enjoy going to the grocery store and cooking something. Like I just like everything's accounted for, and I that makes me feel good. Makes me feel like I'm living a full life, and I won't have regrets when I die. So yeah, it definitely is not a work thing. Like I don't feel that way about work. I'm happy to let let if for my coworkers who are watching, big reveal, I'm okay with things sitting on in my inbox for a few days. um, but I'm really talking about just like my life. Like I want to feel like when I die I've done everything. And so being that type of person um, means that I'm actively, like right now I'm actively promoting this book, which means I'm actively in conversation, pitching, talking to people, um, you know, doing all the work I have to pitch. And so I see that as my job right now.
Yeah.
So I have multiple jobs and I take them all seriously. I do different things different days. I don't do all of them the same day. Um, and I do rest. I sleep a lot, actually. I sleep about 11 hours. And sometimes I think that is why I can be so productive, because I sleep an insane amount of time. And so I have a lot of energy.
Yeah. Yeah, I love hearing you say you sleep 11 hours because, like, that's my goal is to sleep almost 11 hours every night, and that doesn't happen, I mean, but I sleep, like, 7 to 9 a night, I think, which is, like, pretty good, but, like, sleep is so important, and you just rest itself is important. Like, I remember, um, when we swam together a few months ago, it was, take a break in between sets. It's okay. You're just gonna get gassed, then like you're not gonna feel good during it. I'm like, yeah, you're right, Mona. I'll take a break. I'll chat with you for
For our listeners, we swim together.
yes.
Context. Yes, yes, it is true. I am really big on sleep. I'm not like a rest person, like watch TV, movies, scroll on Instagram. I'm like either do something or like literally be catatonic
Yeah.
in the bed. I'm pretty extreme and I will sleep a lot. But like when I'm doing exercise, oh yeah, I will take breaks because I just don't feel like it's a good idea to exercise from a place of lack, like lack of oxygen or lack of energy. Can't do it.
Yeah. And I want to go back to because you had said, the line this will all tie in together. But going back to the line about, that line of the ripe peach, the sun, you wrote that 25 years ago, and you go back to things that you've thought about. And I think a little bit about like that rest period in between ideas. Like you write something and you leave it be and you let it percolate and another idea pops up. Can you talk a bit about what does that process, your own process, look like for storing ideas, for rest when it comes around, like letting things just sit for a bit, then that ideation, illumination?
That's a great question because you're really getting into the head of a creative. I think every creative person has something around this process. They all look different, but something around this process. And I think my process, I've heard of people who write things, shove it in a desk, don't look at it for a little while. My process is to get the feedback, whether it's someone looking at a painting or my editor, get the feedback, read all the feedback, get super overwhelmed, and then freeze.
Yeah.
And then I will just freeze until I feel um, like I can give myself an incentive to start. Like, what's an incentive? Like, if you take the first stab at the first chapter, you can go for drinks or something like that. I try to incentivize the first start, and then once I incentivize and start going, then I just run with it. I get into it. Once I get into it, I focus and I have a good time. But I heard someone, I wish I remembered who said this, but someone said once that the worst part of any making a movie is the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie. And I would argue that the worst part of writing the book is the beginning and the end.
Mm.
Those two are the most difficult.
And can you elaborate why those are the most? Is it just like the getting the fire under your ass to actually get going, and then like the being able to like pump the brakes to actually stop the train?
Well, just having the ending be meaningful enough where people feel satiated when they walk away. You know what I mean? Like, I decided to end with her drinking a glass of water and putting the glass of water down and saying she was so happy she knew what Amazon rain tasted like, and that she knew the difference between New York water. And that's how I ended it, because I felt it was a callback to the water mamas. It was a callback to water.
Mm-hmm.
The girls had been swimming in the book, which was another way of paralleling water mamas and women swimming in a pool. So I had used a lot of water. And so I wanted to end with a single glass of water. But let me tell you, like, that ending, it was like something to really, like, just pull your hair out thinking, like, how is this book going to end?
Yeah.
And how does the book begin? I mean, it's so hard to get rolling, and then whatever you write is going to be shit at first. So you just don't know how it's going to start. Um, Luckily, I had an editor who took the middle of my book and edited it and put it at the beginning. So it wasn't my decision. And thank God, because I would have made a shit decision. So she put the middle at the beginning and reordered the book. And so she really helped with the beginning, because my beginning, like, we start with action. Like, once you start reading the book, it's like action. It's her with a group of Indigenous people discussing the Rain Project. Boom, we're like in it. We have not wasted any time building up to it. We're in it. And that's what she wanted. She wanted to start the book in it.
Beginning and the end are the hardest parts of your whole process. What are the feelings that you're getting at that time? Like, I love hearing getting started. Like, what's the incentive there? Because I think of, I'm always struggling with routines and setting up like good structures for myself that will allow me to get the things that I need to do done, but then also have that downtime of doing absolutely nothing. But it's the like tricking my brain into like, here's the incentive and you can do that, but my brain knows that I'm trying to trick itself, so those things don't really work for me. So how did you figure that out, that was like the carrot, be it drinks, be it whatever, but like how did you get in touch with your body and your brain in that way to understand this is what I need to do and this is how my brain works in order to get to what I'm trying to get to do here?
Well, I think my litmus test is, are you excited?
Mm.
That's what I ask myself. Like, are you excited to start this book? Hell no. Are you excited to go out for drinks with your friends? Yes. Are you excited to get a massage? Yes. So starting with what's exciting and then basically shoehorning what's not exciting before it. And then you know what? Once you get past the beginning of a re-edit, it does get fun. It does get exciting. When you're in the middle of it, when you're flowing, when you're going, that part's really fun. I just don't have fun at the beginning or the end. But I do have fun once I get going. So I'm not like incentivizing the entire book. It's really just the beginning and the end.
What is your relationship with imposter syndrome now that like you call yourself an author? Do those demons still creep up? How have you learned
Yes.
to how what does that feel like for you, and how do you move through it?
Yeah, I still have it. I mean, I think if you ask me why, I would say, well, I was never traditionally published. I feel I wasn't given that gold star of approval. But every day that goes by, I feel more like, like being offered an author talk, book talk. It's like, okay, people are still using the term. But yeah, I felt as an imposter because I felt like these big, institutions that have been around for hundreds of years, such as literary agents and, publishers, they didn't see promise in my book. And so, yeah, I totally felt like an imposter when I was self publishing. When I was first self publishing, such imposter syndrome. Could barely talk about the book without feeling some type of shame that I was printing it at Amazon. And the other reason I think April wanted to print at Ingram Spark is because people would go, ugh, Amazon, gross.
Uh-huh.
Because obviously I have, woke friends who don't want anything to do with Jeff Bezos. So that was the other issue, is that KDP on Amazon gives you the best deal. And I think their book construction's a little bit better because I have both books at home.
Mm.
And I think the saturation, the richness of their colors is a little bit better. So I actually think Amazon makes a better book.
Hmm.
And I could sell it cheaper on Amazon. But Ingram Spark is for everyone who doesn't want to support, a billionaire, exploited billionaire. I wanted to produce something that people who felt strongly about what's happening um, in our economy could get a book that was produced, in a different way, not mass market, not connected to $1 billion company, $1 zillion, $1 trillion, I don't know. And so, yeah, Ingram Spark really helped me. Once I saw that it was being held in small bookstores or Barnes and Nobles, then my imposter syndrome started to really be challenged. And I was like, yo, if my book's in Barnes and Nobles, maybe I am an author.
Yeah. And I think it's like actually seeing like the fruits of your labor go recognized in that way. It's not just like this wasn't just like a pipe dream and I tried it and it didn't work, but like actually seeing critical response and local response and getting having it be picked up in these places. There's a sense of legitimacy there for the work that you've done.
Yeah.
Since this is climate fiction, but it's rooted in fact, you're writing about environmental futures. Like, how do you think about AI's relationship to the subject that you cover?
Um, I think Indigenous people will not be as affected by AI as the West will be. So I think this is a scenario where people living more remote will not have as many psychological problems. I've been following a lot of different philosophers and thinkers and researchers talk about the effect of AI on Gen Z.
Mm.
One small thing they said that really hit me was they said, nowadays, if you go to a club, no one dances. And the woman said, why don't people dance? And the guy said, because everyone's being recorded and no one wants to be recorded dancing. And when I heard that, my heart broke
Yeah.
because I was like, people are going to stop doing stuff because they don't want to be recorded. When you think about it, everywhere like someone's recording. And I think like my time in the Amazon, there was no AI 10 years ago when I was there. But I will say that social media, I mean, people had Instagram, they had social media, but it wasn't a scenario where um, people were filming everything. It was a scenario of people putting their phones down and dancing.
Mm,
And I see, again, I don't, it's not a monolith. Maybe now they are recording each other dancing.
yeah.
Maybe they are. But I feel like there's just so much more activities and things you have to do with other people and that you have to do physically and have to be present. Little parallels in my youth program, we try to do phoneless activities. And you may be asking, what's a phoneless activity? Kayaking.
Mm,
You can't bring your phone into the kayak,
nope.
it'll get wet. Ropes courses, you can't have your phone on you, it'll fall off a tree. So we try to do phoneless activities, and we're basically mimicking life in the forest, because kayaking is what you would do to catch fish,
Hmm.
right? And so you're not going to have your phone in the boat while you're fishing, because it'll get wet. So it's like, I think about these little parallels, that we're basically doing these activities outdoors that have a true function in other societies.
Yeah.
We're just kayaking to look at the sea lions in Moss Landing, but or even climbing trees. People climb trees to get to certain um, honeycombs, or to get to certain leaves to make a tea, or to get to certain parts of the bark where you can poke a hole and drain the resin, or you can um, get fruits that are really high up that are on the emergent layer, or something like that. um, so if you're climbing a tree, which is what we do on our ropes course, you're not going to have a phone on you. You're just not going to have a phone on you when you're climbing a tree. I'm sure there's exceptions.
Of course.
Nothing here is absolute.
Right.
But what I'm trying to say is, like, we do activities that the equivalent of them would be done for a true useful purpose, that you just wouldn't have a phone.
But we were talking about that too, just like when we were swimming. Like
No
this is a great exercise that like you literally cannot be on your phone.
No, you can't. And on top of that, people are swimming to fish. People are going into the river all the time. You're not going to have your phone on you when you go swimming and you fish. And yeah, there's so many activities that you just don't have your phone on you, and I feel like it's just a culture where, and the other difference in, like, indigenous cultures, not all of them but some of them that I visited, is that the day and night is when everyone's all together sleeping in a circular structure. Everyone's together. They can hear everything, but everyone's together. And then during the day, everyone separates and goes out in either sets of ones or twos or threes, or ones. And then everyone comes home and sleeps together.
Mhm.
And in the US, we sleep alone, and then we go out to work in the office where there's hundreds of people, and then we go back alone to home. So I feel like there's all these little differences that, the more AI isolates youth in this country through, I was reading something like Professor Galloway, who studies this. He was saying that something like 70% of teenage boys have never approached a girl, and they say they never will. The majority of them are addicted to synthetic porn, not even real porn, robot porn. They don't leave the house, all these things because of, I mean, the synthetic porn is definitely AI. The number one use of AI right now is companionship. Something like 17% of youth have, boyfriends or girlfriends on AI. So I think there's a lot of isolation because of AI in the Western world, that I don't think is going to hit uh, Amazonian cultures as hard.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, because my initial question there was, thinking more about, like, the water usage of AI data
Oh,
centers, but, like,
oh,
I
oh.
love the direction that this went, where it's like, no, it's actually more of, like, a public health crisis than it is, like, a water crisis. I mean, it can be both, it's not they don't exist by
It is a
themselves.
water crisis.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah, of
yeah,
course.
but thinking a lot about, you're working with youth in that, like, 16 to 22 range, you know, what do you want them to understand about creativity as a tool for change?
I think creativity always has to be the first step. I really do. Um, it has to be the lens with which you start, you know, and just imagine of all the different scenarios and modalities of what's possible, start there. Because I think if you start with what has been done before, you're already being limited. If you start with other people's opinions, you're being limited. I think it's really just dreaming. I think dreaming needs to be the first step of any big thing you take on is to dream. My ex-husband once said to me, people are what they spend their time doing. If you're always working, you're a worker. If you don't have time to dream, you're never dreaming. So he would say, set aside time to dream, and be aware of you are what you spend your time doing.
I I love that. I love that so much because my initial thought is like, creativity is where it starts, and I start to envision, you know, someone either obstinately or just, like, without the access to it being like, "Well, I don't have any skill. Like, I'm not a painter. I don't know how to draw." But it's like, it doesn't that's those are technical aspects
Those
of
are
creativity.
technical.
Like, the root of creativity is using your brain and just, like, dreaming and exploring and wishing and hoping. So there's so much of this that's just cerebral, and we all have brains and we all have the capability of doing that. So it doesn't really matter what the medium is. It's like, what can you feel within your heart and what is your brain telling you?
I'm actually going to dinner with a teenager tonight, one of my friend's daughters, who's 18, and our goal tonight at dinner is to dream. Literally, that's our goal tonight. Because she's 18, she's at the precipice of what do I do next, and people are giving her ideas, and some of them she's like, "Is this possible? Is that not possible?" And I said, "Let's get away from talking about what's possible. Let's just dream.
Yeah.
Let's just dream." So that's tonight's activity.
How do you do that for yourself? Do you need somebody else to coach you in that way? Like, to give yourself the permission, or how do you dream for yourself?
I'm a big dreamer. It's like a really big part of who I am. Like I am always dreaming. One of my dreams is that this book get turned into a movie. I'm hoping if I say it enough times, you know, it'll happen. I'll manifest it. Um, And other dreams I have is to be traveling all the time. I don't have children, so that is my privilege to travel. And I want to make the most of that privilege and, travel as much as I can. And I'm always dreaming of the next
Yeah,
place.
me too.
Um, and I'm always dreaming of the next project. Right now, I keep wanting to dream up the next project, but the current project is so intense that it feels like it's not the right time.
Mm.
Because, like, even right now, I'm like, this podcast, next week, another podcast, then an interview, then a book talk, just in the next 4 weeks. So it's like, I don't really, because I'm like preparing psychologically for each one of these. So I don't really think I have the time to dream. So the time to dream maybe when I'm traveling. I'm going to be traveling in a month. And so maybe there I'll start to dream about what I want to do next.
Mm. And again, going back to, you had that the line about the ripe peach and the sun. Like, my brain always immediately goes to, like, okay, tell me the logistics of that. Like, do you use, like, your notes app? If it was 25 years ago, it probably wasn't the notes
I
app.
remember
So it's like just up in
I
your head.
I just remembered it.
You must have an incredible memory then, because my memory is garbage, and I need to like I have to have
No, I actually have a horrible memory, but I do have a memory for lines I've written because that was a poem I wrote. Um, I have memories for lines I've written. I won a poetry contest when I was in, fun fact, I won a poetry contest when I was 8 years old in my school. Um, and I'm not going to read it now, but I do remember the poem that
wonderful.
I won for.
Do you remember the first painting you ever did?
No, because I've been painting for so long, I don't remember the first one. I've been painting probably since like 5.
Yeah. Did your Now, was that something that you picked up through a teacher? Was it your parents providing you materials? Like what first piqued that interest in painting?
I think I always drew as a kid, like always drew, and then I think um I was always in art classes because I went to a very privileged high school where there were really great art programs. And so I was in every single art class in every grade, and like that's where I first started to paint. So I think around 5 or 6, I did my first painting. I think it was of irises or
Mm,
daffodils. And then I just, and she loved it. The teacher loved it. I got encouraged by every art teacher I had. They took special interest in me, gave me special attention, and I just was like, I guess this is me.
yeah.
So I identified as an artist. When I was 5 years old, my school had like a ceremony where every kid came out and said what they wanted to be. And I came out and said, I want to be an artist at 5. So I think I always knew. I just didn't know logistically how it was going to work because once I took that environmental studies class, I was like, I definitely want to be outside.
Hmm.
But I always knew I would still be an artist.
I love that so much. Like you're able to like hold space for all of those aspects of things that you love and that are important to you. Do you know what I wanted to be when I was little?
What?
I told people I wanted to be an ice cream man.
There was an underlying reason. Was it because you wanted to talk to lots of
It
people?
was because I was allergic to dairy at the time, so I couldn't have the ice cream. But it was like I would just love to give the ice cream to other people to see the enjoyment on their faces. What a
Oh my God,
sad
that's so
kid!
beautiful. That's so beautiful. You were so giving from such a young
So
age and so
giving.
so empathetic.
So just like, oh man, just looking at their faces, enjoying like the Mr. Softy vanilla cone with the crunchies on top, just like, oh, I wish I could be you. I mean, that's probably not even ice cream, but it's probably like ice cream product or something. But
It's soy. It's soy.
it's soy. But I mean, now that I can have dairy, I mean, it's probably not even dairy at this point. But like, man, nothing hits the spot better than like a chocolate Mr. Softy from one of those Mr. Softy ice cream trucks. I don't know. That's like summer in New York to me. I just love it so much. I want to wrap up. You know, climate fiction is like sometimes dismissed as like this is genre, but how do you think about the value of your storytelling in urgent conversations? Like what can this novel do that a policy paper or a protest can't do?
I think empathy, like putting yourselves in the perspective of someone who's fighting a geochemical and engineering project, because we will all be those people. We will all be on the ground somehow, having an opinion, protesting, or being involved with or considering some geoengineering program as we move forward. It's just going to be a real thing, you know. Um, so geoengineering also has to do with the foods you eat. You know, just the idea of geoengineering nature to control nature is something we should all know about because it affects all of us. You know, I'm going to say it wrong, but glyphosate was very much ruled out as a pesticide, fertilizer, whatever its use is. And this current administration just signed an executive order to double up the supply and the extraction and the production. And I think, these questions of like, what is being used around us? Like, I want to know. And the idea that these Indigenous people are able to fight it with the prior informed consent, free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, which is precedent under international law. We're going to have to start thinking about our own laws and our own rights. Is it these forever chemicals, the PFAS, that are released into the water? I have a right to drink water that doesn't have that in there. Like, that's my right, and I think just thinking about our rights as nature is being changed and everything around us is being changed, like, we have a right to be involved. And this story is like like a allegory. It's like people are fighting for their right to consent over a geoengineering project that affects the whole earth, but smaller, affects the glass of water coming from your tap. So I honestly think truly we all need to read this book as a sort of um, just warning of how we need to get involved. I guess that's my call to action, is just get involved with all these processes that are changing our physical environments. um, it's never ending. I just mentioned a few, but we are currently geoengineering artificial rain, and Australia did stop. So if this is your issue, go for it. But there's so many others that this is just an analogy for.
Yeah. Do you think you'll write another book that focuses on another aspect of this?
Um, I would love to, but the idea hasn't come to me yet, which means I haven't dreamed enough. So I think I have to set aside some time to dream, and then I think it'll come.
I love that. I love that. And I always talk about this on this podcast, like the definition of success and failure, because it's so personal to what you feel. So, like from the nonfiction book flopping through all the rejections to where you are now, like how has your definition of success and failure changed?
How has my definition of success and failure changed? This is such a good and hard question because you want to be really thoughtful when you answer this. Um, okay, so I think success for me now is being content with myself. That is success for me, because no matter if there's more benchmarks and there's a better thing and a better thing and a better thing to do, um, if I'm not content when I get to the next benchmark and then the next benchmark, it's just a rat race, and it's just makes me feel like shit, and it's bad for my nervous system. I'm not regulated. So I think, yes, I have dreams, but I am content with how things are now with my book. I'm content with how things are in my artwork. I'm content with how things are at work. Um, so I truly think contentment is
Mm,
success. There was a time that I was not content.
yeah.
Um, and I think I actually might be peaking right now, because I seem to be content in a lot of areas of life,
Mm.
which tells me you might be peaking. Um, and so maybe there'll be a time in the future I won't be, but right now I'm pretty content. Failure looks like abandoning yourself.
Mm.
Failure looks like wanting something so bad that you change yourself in a way that you lose integrity and respect for yourself in order to fit some other thing outside yourself. It could be a person, it could be a project, um, it could be a book or a painting, or it could be a lover, it could be anything. It could be a movie you're directing, or a business you're running, a business idea. So I would say abandoning myself is failure, because I have abandoned myself and I felt like a failure as a person. And I feel as I've gotten older, I am learning what it looks like to not abandon myself.
I love that.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Mona Shomali. Check the show notes for links to her novel Water Mamas, a novel of climate, spirituality, and Indigenous human rights, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or if you'd rather support a local bookstore, you can request it there too, since it's in the Ingram Spark catalog. Also in the show notes, her Substack, where she writes on climate, Indigenous rights, and more. It's a great follow. The latest Creatives Processing mixtape is out now. I put these together every month, a playlist of music I'm listening to and loving. You'll find the link in the show notes too. If this conversation resonated with you, I'd love it if you shared it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't yet, leave a rating wherever you're listening. It legit makes a difference. Be a kind friend and help me grow this podcast. You can find me and my creative studio Word of Mouth at wordofmouthcreative.co. If you're a brand or organization looking for a creative partner, someone who leads with strategy, storytelling, and a real human point of view, that's what I do. Come say hi. This episode was produced by Word of Mouth, edited by Kai Indamar, and our theme music is by John Michael Rochelle. Till next time, thanks for listening to Creatives Processing.